I've got a really good friend, and I call him a friend because I was with him before he actually became chief. If you will, go ahead and show that picture there. This is Billy Bolin. I don't even remember or know if he remembers this. This is probably 7 years ago when I first came on as a chaplain of the Evansville Police Department. I went out on a ride along with him. We went to lunch and someplace on Green River Road. But Billy was really out doing stuff, making a difference for the kingdom. You know, even in the beginning, I don't know, how many of you guys are familiar with Kids Kingdom by the river? Billy and another individual is the one who founded that. He's the one who incorporated that, got that going, so to speak, which is phenomenal. How many of you guys are familiar with Guns and Hoses? That's the boxing between the firefighters and the police department. Billy Bolin, once again, was an originator. He was the one that helped to bring that in. And guys, I don't know about you, but I'm not too much of a country fan at all. Let me say that again, I'm not too much of a country fan. However, how many of you guys know Garth Brooks?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no album. There we go. Yeah, no album. All right. Garth Brooks. Billy had a desire to meet Garth Brooks, and he went with several other officers, and they went and stood outside his house or whatever. And guys, as God is my witness, as unbelievable as you might believe, once again, he put God in a box, but he was thinking, you know, we can see him, we can meet him. And he came out, was taking his daughter to school or son to school or something, and he actually talked with them and then invited them back. They got pictures with him, and Brian Turpin was a part of that group, and I tell you, it's just amazing. But here's a mover and a shaker. Here's an individual who really did not allow God to be put in a box, and I thought that was phenomenal. One of the things that really blessed me is because sometimes we start out in certain ways, and we start out doing things, and when we start out doing things, we never know how God is going to move us or propel us into the next place or the next position. Billy had started out as a regular driver, a patrol officer, and it was really interesting because he was promoted to sergeant. And when he had gotten promoted to sergeant, there was an individual, a couple of individuals that went off to Afghanistan, went to the war, and so their positions needed to be filled. And then as a regard of those positions needing to be filled, he was promoted. And when they came back, they incidentally went back to their position as sergeants. And so he was literally demoted back to a patrol officer. I thought, wow, that is awesome. You know, awesome in the sense because now you feel how it was, or you experience something that you don't want to see repeated. And so now he's at the range where he can make standards or guidelines where that'll never happen again. Once again, I tell you, it's really, really neat. What I wanted Billy to come, and I wanted to share his testimony about how he got to the top. And Billy, could you go ahead and stand up there with me? Billy's really a good-looking guy, right? Yeah. Billy, just looking at him, before I go any further, guys, I want you to understand that this guy is only 39 years old. Oh, let me say that again. 39 years old, guys. And he's actually the chief of police, which, again, I think is phenomenal. Amen? Billy, if you will, go ahead and share with us your testimony of how God really just blessed you and brought you where you are, and you will share your faith as well.
Is this on? Yeah. When Tyrone and I talked the other day, he asked me to give my testimony of being a police officer, and then he said also, talk about your Christian testimony. If you don't mind, I'm going to flop it to you, and I'm just going to talk about my life real quick going into this. I think it flows better. My real dad passed away when I was 2 years old, had leukemia, died, and my mom remarried shortly after that. The guy she remarried was an alcoholic. So I grew up, and he was very abusive. So I grew up in a home with a guy that would wake us up in the middle of the night, beating my mom, slamming her against the wall, punching her, throwing things through the walls. So that was my experience as a little child, was growing up in a home with an alcoholic that beat my mom. I had stepbrothers and stepsisters that lived with us. And when I was about 7 years old, my mom was able to get away from him. And a year or two later, she ended up remarrying a guy that became my stepdad. From this point on, if you hear me talk about my dad, that would be who I'm referring to. He raised me. He was a hardworking guy, a great guy, Christian in name only. Same with my mom. They would tell you they were a Christian, but we didn't go to church. I wasn't raised in church. How many people we have in here that are in middle school? And how many in high school? For you two groups, if you could listen to my next point, it's, I think, very important for you. When I was an 8th grader, a friend of mine, a guy named Phil Culbertson, and I went to Harrison High School on the east side, so all you west siders don't hate me for that. I went to Harrison High School, and Phil, when I was at McGarry Middle School, had tried to convince me to go to church with him, and I kept putting him off, and I didn't want to go. Well, when we became freshmen at Harrison, they had a Bring Your Friend to Church Day, and he talked me into going with him to church, and that was in February of 1988. And I don't know the date that I originally went with him, but I know that the last Sunday of February 28, 1988, I became saved. I turned my life over to Christ, and it was because my friend had asked me to go. And me and him are still friends to this day. I don't go to his church anymore. I go to Crossroads on the east side. But I went all through my high school years to church with him, and I lived in a home that didn't go to church. So you guys can make a difference, and don't ever think that just because you're a kid, you can't change the world. He changed my life. And when my wife and I started dating, she had went to a church here in Evansville. The church I went to was in Henderson. Although I lived here, his grandpa was the pastor of a small church in Henderson. And so my wife and I, when we decided we were going to get married, we started looking for a church together. And at the time we found what was Cullen Avenue Christian Church on the east side. That's now grown into Crossroads, and that's still where we go. I told Tyrone this morning, my wife apologized because she's not here today, but my oldest boy is a sophomore in high school, and he's on the leadership team at Crossroads for the youth. And they had a retreat this weekend, and he was getting back in town at 10:30 this morning at Crossroads, so otherwise she would have joined us. But that's my Christian story, how I became a Christian. But I also want to let you know that I was the kid in high school and in middle school that was there, but you really didn't know. I was an underachiever. I sat in the room, I would sleep. I probably did homework 5 times in my whole high school career. And I'm not telling you guys to do that, that's unacceptable. And I tell my kids this, I'm not a hypocrite, but I'm a very strict parent. My kids are A and B students, and I don't accept anything less. But as a kid, I was an underachiever, and I was just there. I was scared of my own shadow. I wouldn't stand up to anybody. I was nervous. When we had speech in high school, I flunked. I had an F, and you could write out your speech. And I can remember standing in front of that class with my sheet of paper and just shaking. I was so afraid, and I wouldn't get up and talk to a group. And police work is what changed that for me. And he mentioned Kids Kingdom. I'm going to skip to that, but I'll go back just a little bit. When we did Kids Kingdom, and just this past weekend I ran into, does anybody know Pat Coslett from Coslett's Furniture? Pat, his furniture store was next to one of the grade schools, Cedar Hall. Cedar Hall. Yeah, Cedar Hall. And I had met him. I was a school liaison officer for a while. I met Pat. He cared about kids. He was on the school board at the time. And I was scared to death to talk to the news media. I was scared to death to talk to a group. I wouldn't have done what I'm doing right now. And I tried to talk Pat into being our spokesman for the Guns and Hoses, or the Kids Kingdom project. And he said, I'm so busy, I can't do it. I had tried to get some other police officers to do it. I tried to get everybody, and I had one that committed, said he would do it. Well, every time we had some interview or something, he was out of town, was unavailable. And so I started getting stuck doing these news interviews and going out, and I was a nervous wreck. And I didn't know it at the time, but God was using that to help me. Now, I would get up and talk to anybody at any time about anything. I'm on the news all the time, and it doesn't even faze me. If they call and ask me to talk, I just get up and talk. But I was scared to death to do that, and I wouldn't, and I was forced into it. And along with this series here, I was forced out of my box. It wasn't something I wanted to do. I reluctantly went along, and then, honestly, I think had I not done that, I definitely wouldn't be the chief of police. But had I not been the public figure that got out and talked about that, that's how I met Lloyd Winnicky. Lloyd was a vice president at Fifth Third Bank, and he was the one in charge of giving money away. So I met Lloyd by hitting him up for community projects I was doing, and that ultimately led to me being in the job that I am today. So I didn't realize it at the time, but God used that for me. And I'm going to backtrack real quick to the thing that got me into Kids Kingdom. Actually, was I became Boise High School's liaison officer in 2001. The officer that was before me had started a project at Culver Elementary School about 20 years prior Anybody in here ever go to Culver? Couple, and I don't know if you can remember at Christmas, you'd get a bucket with little things in it, and this officer had started this program about 20 years before me, where he got communities, business leaders to donate things, and they would have a little bucket, it'd have fruit, candy, different little things in it. Well, when I became the officer for Boise High School, Culver was one of my schools, and my lieutenant at work had told me, there's this program that Officer Helms has done at Culver. It's a waste of time, it's a lot of work, don't mess with it. I wouldn't do it. Well, I go do my first officer-friendly talk at Culver, and several of the little kids asked me if they were going to get their Christmas bucket that year. And, you know, it's one thing for your boss to be telling you it's a waste of your time, it's another when you have a little kid looking at you asking if he's going to get his Christmas bucket. So I said, yeah, you'll get your Christmas bucket. And so I went ahead and continued that program. And I had no idea how that program was going to change my life or what it would do to me. We had 450, 500 kids that went to Culver at the time, and the businesses that donated were pretty much the same businesses every year, but we kind of expanded that program, we started adding more to it, and I learned how much our community is willing to give. All you have to do is ask. If it's not that big a deal, and Brian Turpin, I'll hit on that in a minute with him, he's another one that learned this, that we have a giving community, and I was a guy that didn't know that. I didn't know anything about fundraising, but I inherited this program that was already going, and I just continued it. Well, a couple months after that, I'd say probably April that year, it was after, so 4 or 5 months after Christmas, my wife and I had 2 young kids. We go down to the river to walk. We've got a beautiful riverfront, really nothing down there, and I'm complaining about how there's nothing to do for our kids down there. And I said, you know, they've got that real nice playground at Newburgh they did. I don't know why we don't have something like that. I don't know why somebody doesn't do that. I don't know why the city doesn't do that. And I said, you know, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to get one of those. And my wife laughs at me and says, yeah, right, whatever. So it actually became like a challenge for my wife that I'm going to prove to her that I can do this. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how to do it. I can't build a wooden shelf for you. I mean, if I go to Walmart and buy one of those little bookcases that should take 15 minutes to put together, it's going to take me 3 hours. I'm just not a skilled person, but I had this idea that we're going to build a playground on our riverfront, and I'm talking to one of our other police officers about it, and he says, well, I'll help you. And he didn't know any more than I did. And we called the Parks Department and told them we'd like to talk to them about this idea. And I know the Parks Department is in the basement of the C.K. Newsom Center. It was at the time. So I thought we were going to go to a meeting in the basement of the C.K. Newsom Center. Well, we go over there that day, and they said, no, they meet in the city council chambers. Why they meet there? So we go up there, and this meeting is in the city council chambers. There's news media there, people everywhere, and I about went into freak out mode. And the very next morning, the headline on the front page of the paper is police officers plan $300,000 playground on the riverfront. And at that point, you're like, what have I done? I have no idea, man. You're past the point of return at that point. So I didn't know how to raise this money. I didn't know how to build anything. I didn't know what we were going to do. But it was too late. I'd already committed. So we learned as we went. And I think, in hindsight, this was another one of those, God pushing me out of my box. If you would have laid this out to me and I would have taken the time to thought about what I was doing, I would have never done it. And if you would have said you're going to have to raise $300,000, you're going to have to organize 1,300 volunteers, or all these other things, I would have said no. But I jumped before I thought, and it ended up leading to that great playground. And I got awards out of it. A couple years later, another police officer has this idea of a boxing event. I originally told him, no, I didn't know anything about boxing. I said, nobody here likes boxing. Nobody's going to go to this. And he said, you know, there's an event like this in St. Louis. They get 18,000 people a year go to it. I think we could raise a lot of money. So I still blew him off. About a month later, he comes back to me again. After I finally looked into it, I said, we'll give it a try. So we organized this first Guns N' Hoses event at the Coliseum in downtown Evansville, and I can remember we had been raising money to upkeep Kids Kingdom, and that's why he asked me to do it. He's got a daughter with special needs, and he was trying to raise money to build a group home for this. It's called Prader-Willi syndrome, and wanted us to co-do this to help fund Kids Kingdom and to help raise money for his event. And we took $500 that we had in our Kids Kingdom account to reserve the Coliseum, and we were a nervous wreck over that. Thought, we're going to lose our $500, so we're sure we should do this. Well, that first event at the Coliseum sold out. We had 2,000 people. We raised about $20,000. And then afterwards, we had to decide, you know, what are we going to do? We can't grow anymore. The Coliseum was full. We could raise prices. Robert Stadium's a lot bigger. I mean, so it was another one of those leaps of faith. Do we move to the stadium? Do we not? So we went ahead and pulled the trigger. We said we're going to move to the stadium. Well, we raised $20,000 the first year. It took us $20,000 to put on the event at Robert Stadium the next. By the time we rented the stadium, we paid for the sound and light. It was a major leap of faith. Well, we ended up raising $80,000 that first year, and we're getting ready for our 6th year coming up at the arena. Last year we raised $130,000. All this money goes back to local charities. Quick story on Tyrone. He said our prayer at the beginning of each one. We had him get up and just say a prayer. Well, for the second one at the stadium, I called Tyrone and I said, hey, this is the order of events. At this point, we're going to have you get up and if you can say a short prayer. And that's the only time I've ever been afraid of Tyrone, is when I told him he was going to say a short prayer. It made it clear to me that he would say the prayer as long as he wanted to say it. And I don't think he'll argue. But the last story I'm going to tell you is the one he mentioned on Garth Brooks. And a few of you said you'd heard of him. I listen to all kinds of music. I mean, and when I was in high school, it was the same way. You could get in my CD case and find everything from country music to hardcore rap to R&B to the local pop, so a little bit of everything. I listen to everything, but when I was in high school is when Garth Brooks came along, and I became a real big Garth Brooks fan. Well, Pat Burnett and the other officers wanted to start Guns N' Roses, had done some musical concerts, and he had not local but smaller country acts, Brian White, Lila McKeon, people that had some hits but they're pretty low. He said, you know, I'd like to start doing these concerts again. And I said, Pat, you know, they don't raise that much money. He was using high school gyms. And I'm kind of the attitude, you know, go big or go home. If you're going to do something good big, or don't waste your time doing it. And I told Pat, I said, you know, Garth Brooks retired. He's raising his daughters. He's a charitable guy, though. I think he wants to perform. I think we gave him a reason to come here. And he said, you're not going to get Garth Brooks to come to Evansville. That's crazy. But I went to Jonathan Winesapple, who was the mayor at the time, and they were building the arena, and I said, you know, I've got this idea. I think if we approach Garth Brooks, we could get him to open up this new arena. And I said, would you give me the blueprints or the go to do this if I could do it? And he said, well, how are you going to meet with him? And I said, well, I've got a way I think I know I can meet with him. He didn't ask for details. I didn't tell him we were a stalker guy. So anyway, Winesapple gives me all these blueprints, says if you can get Garth Brooks to commit, you can have the first event at the new arena. So that was my idea. And I'm trying to convince these 2 other officers that are on the Guns N' Roses board that we should get him. And in that process, I'm trying to think, what could I do to get him to commit? What would he benefit? And he's got a national charity called Teammates for Kids, where they team up with Major League Baseball players, hockey players, basketball stars, and they commit. And whatever town they're from or whatever, their money goes back to the local inner cities in that area. So say Michael Jordan was going to do this, he would donate $100 for every shot he hit, and that money would go back into Chicago, just as an example. So I was trying to think of what we could do from a law enforcement side to tie in with that. And I don't know if you guys are aware, Brian Turpin in the back, he was one of the founders of Holly's House. And when Brian came up with the idea for Holly's House, he approached Holly Dunn Pendleton to get involved. And that's where they came up with the name. But one of the things that Brian did for fundraising is he asked police officers to donate out of their check every week. And he asked for a minimum of $1 a pay. And several of us gave more than $1 a pay. But he got almost the whole department to agree to give money out of their paycheck every week to help fund Holly's House. So I went and I talked to Brian and I said, you know, how'd you do this? With the banks and what was the process, and he wanted to know why I wanted to know this as well. I'm thinking maybe we pitch this idea to Garth Brooks that he joins with law enforcement and maybe firefighters too, since we're a group now that works together, and gets them to donate $1 a pay out of their checks and goes back into their local communities. And so Brian says, oh, I love Garth Brooks, I want to be a part of this. So he hopped on board with me when the other 2 officers thought I was nuts, like most of you would. And so anyway, I make a before I talked to Winesapple, let me backtrack. I had made a list of reasons why I thought Jonathan Winesapple would let us do this. I made a pro and con list of why I thought Garth Brooks would do this or wouldn't do this. And I'm working a side job in the, most of you probably know better as Suites or Projects. It's now called Caldwell Homes down in the inner city. So we worked a side security job down there. And I've got these lists of pro and cons, and I told one of the other officers that's in on this with me, I want to talk to him about this the next time we work down there. So we're working, I've got these pro and cons, I'm telling him what I want to do. He's telling me, you're nuts, I'm not going to Oklahoma and sitting out in front of this guy's property trying to talk to him. It's not going to happen. While we're talking about that, while I've got these lists on my lap, a guy on a motorcycle pulls up, and this is July 4th weekend. And he says, officers, I've got a question, do you have it? We say, yeah. He says, I'm not from here, I'm from Oklahoma, and I'm wanting to know what the laws are on helmets on a motorcycle. And I kind of laughed, and I said, you're from Oklahoma? I said, I'm sitting here talking about going to Oklahoma, trying to convince him. I said, where are you from? And he says, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I said, we're going close to there, and the town that Garth Brooks lives in is called Owasso, Oklahoma. It's a suburb of Tulsa. This guy says, that's actually where I live, but I didn't think you'd know that. He said, I live in Owasso. So we tell him this far-fetched idea I've got, and then he says, I know Garth Brooks. My boss, and this is in inner city Evansville, Indiana, and ask yourselves how often do you see a car in Evansville, Indiana with an Oklahoma license plate driving? And I've got the papers on my lap talking about where Garth Brooks lives in Oklahoma, trying to convince this other officer telling me I'm nuts. And Brian can verify all this. I'm not making it sounds crazy. But. So the guy says, my boss has kids that play soccer, and they play with his kids, and they go to cookouts at his house and stuff. So he obviously knows we're police officers. He approached us. I tell him what we're wanting to do, and he says, well, here's my phone number. If you go out there and you can't meet him, call me, and I'll have my boss call him and see if he'll meet with him. So he rides off. The other officer's with me, says, okay, I'm in, I'm going. And I firmly believe in divine intervention. I don't think I concocted this whole idea to go meet Garth Brooks. And I definitely think God put this guy in our life to show up on his motorcycle that day. It's too big of a coincidence. So anyway, we planned this trip out. You can find out anything you want on the internet. I mean, I'll fully admit I stalked the poor guy. I had his kids' school schedule, I had their soccer schedule. I knew when he was going to be there, when he wasn't. We weren't going to waste the trip to Oklahoma for no reason. So we rent a car. Brian gets Holly Dunn Pendleton, whose family owns hotels. They reserve a hotel out there for us, get 3 nights comp. So we're going to plan on spending the whole weekend out there until we meet him. So one of the things I read is that him and his ex-wife took turns driving the kids to school every day. So we knew it was a point of his to drive the kids to school. So we drive to Oklahoma, we leave at 3 in the afternoon, we get there late that night, about 1 in the morning, and then the next morning we go out to this property out in the middle of the country. It's a chain link fence, and you can't even tell there's a house out there. It's just a huge property. And we sit out by this gate. While we're sitting there, it's the Oklahoma thunderstorm that you always hear, lightning crashing straight to the ground, and it's pouring, and we're talking in the car, like, even if he comes out, he's not going to get out of the car and then talk to us. And then a couple minutes later, the rain stops, sun pops out, and I'm talking 5 minutes. I mean, it's just complete stops. Well, then I say, I hadn't thought about this, but his oldest daughter is old enough to drive. Hopefully she doesn't drive him all to school now. Yeah. I'm not kidding you. 5 minutes later, here comes a little car down the drive, 2 teenage girls, wave at us, off they go. The other guys, they're not happy. They're like, you drove us all the way to Oklahoma. And didn't even think about this. So a little bit later, his ex-wife comes in a car, goes down this drive, and the drive's so long it just disappears. Comes back a few minutes later, she's got the other kid. So we're thinking, we're going to sit out here in this parking lot forever. Have no idea what's going to happen. Well, another probably 10 minutes, here comes this little SUV down the drive, and it's Garth Brooks. Pulls up next to us, asks what we're doing. We say, well, we were hoping we could talk to you for a few minutes. And he holds up a backpack, says, my daughter forgot her backpack, I've got to run it to school. If you guys wait here, I'll come back and talk to you. Real quick, something I should have said at the beginning. Do you guys know who the best-selling musician in the history of the United States is? Anybody got a guess? Well, Brian knows. Somebody just said Elvis. The Beatles are number 1. Elvis is number 2. Elvis is the top-selling solo artist. The Beatles are the top-selling group. Garth Brooks was the top-selling solo artist And Elvis has repassed him again with his old albums that continue to sell. But Garth Brooks has sold about 130-something million albums. Elvis Presley sold 130-something. To put that in perspective for you, Michael Jackson has sold about 60-something million albums in the United States. So this is one of the biggest selling artists. He's the biggest selling artist that's alive today. And he stops to talk to 4 strangers sitting in the car outside his gate and says he'll be back. I mean, most people don't realize he's sold that many or he's that big. So off he goes. We're all in the car excited. We can't believe he actually talked to us. Sure enough, he comes back. He gets out of his car and he's got on Life is Good pajama pants, flip-flops, and a t-shirt. And he talks to the 4 of us. And we tell him, hey, we're police officers from Indiana. We've got this idea we'd like to pitch to you. And he looks at us kind of like we're crazy. We ask for 10 minutes of his time and he says, go ahead. Well, 45 minutes later, we're still talking. He's throwing ideas back at us. He's smiling, joking. And then we said, sir, we've taken up way too much of your time. One of the things he told us was, you guys have really bad timing. He said, I just signed a deal with Steve Wynn in Las Vegas. I'm going to be under contract with him. It allows me to stay retired, raise my kids, but 1 weekend a month I'm going to perform at the Wynn in Vegas. And he goes, I'd love to do something for you. Maybe we can in the future. And he says, but I've got your contact information. Either me or my assistant will get back with you. We leave, we drive back here. About a month or so later, and he asked us to keep that quiet at the Wynn party. So nobody knows this. Please don't say anything. So about a month or so later, there's this national press conference. It's all over the news. Garth Brooks is going to be at the Wynn. It's every news channel. It's a major deal, and we all knew it before. That next week, I get a call, and it's his publicist. And she says, Garth told me to talk to you guys. I'm sorry it took us so long. We've been organizing this thing. So we talk a little bit. Another few weeks goes by, I get another call, and she says, Garth would like to fly the 4 of you and your wives out to Vegas and be his guest at his show. So Garth Brooks flew me, Brian Turk, and 2 other police officers out to Vegas. He paid for the flight, paid for a hotel. We went to the show, we got to go backstage, and this is because 4 guys stalked him and went to basically what happened. He told us there that day that he promised us that he will come here to Evansville and do a show once his youngest daughter turns 18 and he finished his Vegas run. Well, he quit doing Vegas. His youngest daughter is a junior in high school. I'm still in contact with his assistant, and there's rumor all over the internet that next year he's going to start up his world tour again. So this crazy far-fetched idea may have worked out for us, and he did more for us that he made us promise not to say, but I can tell you this without going into depth, that we've got programs running at Holly's house here in Evansville, Indiana, that Garth Brooks is a big part of. And he doesn't want anybody to know that, but you can't not share that with people, and it's too big a deal. So, but I can tell you that crazy idea wasn't my idea. I don't dream up driving to Oklahoma and talk to a guy, and like I said, the guy on the motorcycle was a linchpin for me. So to younger people especially, never put yourself in that box, in that bucket. And me, I don't really have a bucket list. I didn't start out with ideas that I wanted to do these grand things. And I've thought about this since I talked to Tyrone. It sounds corny, but this is true. If I had one thing in my bucket list, it's I want to see my 3 boys get grown before I leave this earth. If I get that done, I've achieved my bucket list. And I joke with everybody and tell them I want to go work at Disney World someday, but that's not a real reality. It's more seeing my kids get grown. But, don't put yourself in the box. You can do anything you want. I was the kid in high school that was scared of my own shadow, sat there, didn't want to talk, nervous wreck, and now I've done all these things that I would have bet you everything I had, I would have never done anything else. So with that, I'll turn it back to Tyrone.
That's interesting, because I think Billy was trying to get me back. When I told him, he told me to keep it short in my prayer. So I think he was trying to get me back. So praise God. It's just amazing.